Hello, everyone. This is Kendra Tillman. I am the founder of Strong Her Me and the host of the Work Your Plan with Kendra podcast. I'm really excited about today's conversation that we're going to have. I just want to give everyone a few minutes to be able to come in and get ready for the conversation that we are going to be having with our special guest today. For those of you that maybe have never had an opportunity to listen or be a part of the Work Your Plan with Kendra podcast, I just wanted to give you just a little insight into who I am. So I'm Kendra Tillman, and I'm the founder. I'm a women's empowerment coach. And really, my heart is around helping women reclaim their authentic voice in womanhood, work, and worship, and really develop in the leadership gifts and talents that God has given them, and then learn how to actually use those in a very practical way. So through our podcast, one of the things that we do is we invite guests to be a part of the conversation who can help us look at what are those small incremental steps, those little things that we could be doing along the way that are going to move us in the direction of what God is calling us to do. And we know in this process of wanting to live out what God's plan is for your life, that comes with a lot of uncertainty. It comes with some insecurity at times. And then what better way in order for you to grow and develop than to hear from other people who are in a similar journey as you, or who are maybe even further along in the process that you are, to encourage you to keep moving in the direction that God has called you in. And so last year, towards the end of the year of 2020, I knew that I wanted to do something that would allow me to gather women. I have hosted a women's empowerment event for 5 years. And of course, with COVID and pandemic, there's a lot of changes that happened last year. And I wanted a way to keep gathering with women, but I did not want to start another Facebook group. And so I wanted to look at what is something that I love to do. How has God developed me? What uses my gifts, my talents, my strengths? And that's where I came up with the idea of hosting a book club. And so who doesn't love to read a good book with some girlfriends and then really talk about the impact that it had on your life? And so for me, that is my kind of thing. I love to do things like that. And so virtually, it was a great option for us. So we read our first book together in November. That very first book was actually my book, The Strong Womanhood Growth Journal. Then in January, we read The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And then for the month of March, as we were approaching Women's History Month, I knew I wanted to do a book that addressed specifically around issues that are specific to women, and as women are trying to live out this calling that God has placed on the inside of their hearts, and all the different obstacles that they may come up against in that process. And so I recently learned last year from one of my friends about a book by Jo Saxton called Ready to Rise. And that book seemed like the perfect book for us to delve into for the book club. And I'm telling you, it has been so meaningful, so impactful, so powerful for all of us. We have the women in the book club can tell you firsthand that we have had some of the best discussions. There's been crying, there's been laughing, there's been a lot of growth that has happened even in just this 1 month of us reading it. And so what better way to close out the month, Women's History Month, than with the author of the book herself, Jo Saxton. So I'm going to go ahead and Jo, I'm going to bring you on with me. So I keep talking about you, but now you're actually here with me. So welcome to our time together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. So I want to just really quickly, I want to read your bio for people, because, the women in the book club. So we have a studio audience right here in StreamYard. So you all won't be able to see the people that are in our studio audience until I bring them on screen, which will be a little bit later. But there are people in the studio audience, and those people are the women that have participated this month in the book club. And so we know you, we know some of you, right? We know what we read in the pages of the book, right? We don't personally know you. But I wanted to share just a little bit about who you are with the audience, and then I'll let you tell us from your own life, okay? So Jo is an author, a speaker, a podcast host, and a leadership coach. She has dedicated her career to growing leadership teams around the world. and empowering women to find their purpose in their personal lives and in their leadership. She was born in London to parents who immigrated from Nigeria. She credits her family's unrelenting work ethic and the grace of God for the bold, tenacious approach she takes to sharing her wisdom on identity, influence, and living an authentic life. She is characterized by her effervescent, honest, and warm approachability, leaving audiences with practical next steps in the areas that are usually a bit ambiguous. In addition to her work as an author, she has also spearheaded an initiative aimed to help women grow their leadership skills. She lives in Minneapolis with her husband, Chris, and their two daughters. And so we just want to say welcome again, Jo. And could you just share with us a little bit about who you are? Not not what people see on stages, not what they see on here on podcasts, but like as a mom, right? As a wife, all those other roles that you play. Like, what does your life look like if I were to follow you around, like for one day, just one day, not every day, but just one? What would I see?
Oh my gosh, if you were to follow me around for one day, you want me to get help. I think you would tell me that I spend way too much time in Target and I don't need to go one time. You would tell me that I spend a lot of time talking to my friends on Marco Polo. You would probably say, as a wife, my husband and I have been married for 18 years, and we are best friends, and we laugh a lot at each other. Which is great. He's wonderful. As a mum, I feel like I have two teenage girls, so I'm very passionate about them being empowered young women. I'm very passionate about them knowing every aspect of their heritage and their roots. I think they would sometimes say them a lot.
What teenager wouldn't say that their parents are a lot?
And I told them this is the deal. I said, I don't believe in giving you space. We're African. So I'm in your face. That's the role. And hopefully I'm a good friend. Hopefully I'm a good friend and a good sister. And I'm just kind of I'm very grateful to be living in this moment. And grateful to be able to. I would like all my life. I would like all my gifts to be used. Do you know what I mean? I would say I read this quote somewhere. A woman saying, at the end of my life, I want to say, God, I've used everything you've given me. I think I threw it in the book, and I that would be what I would love with my story. That's what I'd love my story to be. Yes.
I'm very, very familiar with that quote. It is. She was a columnist. Irma Bombeck, I think. Yes, because that's like one of my favorite quotes. It's such a great quote. So do you feel like that is a perspective that you've always had, where you were extremely intentional about how do you use the gifts that God has given you, or was it something that over time you got to that point?
Yeah, it took a lot of time, I think. I would say it grew after I had my children. And I think I grew up in England, and so when we moved to the States, there was a sense of purpose to that. But I think in every season of life, that's been a question of not in a haunting way, just in a what does it look like? I walk into situations and say, okay, God, what does it look like to serve you here? And I think what probably stirred me most about it was even as a child, I grew up in an environment where there wasn't much opportunity and there wasn't much access. And I was convinced in where I grew up that it was never an issue of intelligence. It was never an issue of gifting. The kids I grew up with were talented. They were gifted. What they didn't have is access. What they didn't have is opportunity. What they didn't have is investment. And that probably, I think I probably worked out the reverse of my call before I knew what the call was. Those were the things that stirred me, even as a young child, because growing up in the inner city, and you'd have people like in the media describe what inner city kids were like, or people who were taught patronizingly when you were at a library or something because you're a black kid and stuff, and knowing that I think there was whether it was anger or conviction or a combination of both, this sense of all that's missing is the access to the opportunities other people have. That's it.
So good. I'm glad you actually kind of brought that up, because I actually, the first book of yours I read or listened to because it was on Audible was The Dream of You.
Oh yeah.
And about the time that I listened to that book, I had also listened to Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime.
Mm.
And it was so incredible to me to hear you share your story and then also listen to his story and see how much similarities it was when we're all from different countries. And you were actually in London. I think it's kind of like where you tell the story from the book,
Yeah.
right? He was in South Africa and I'm in the US, right?
Yeah.
But we all have these interlapping experiences of being people of color, experiencing similar things in terms of racism, colorism,
Yep.
for you and I, sexism.
Yep.
And I just thought that was so interesting. It was almost validating because sometimes I feel as if you have to prove to people that your experience is real. And I'm like, I can like literally point to, I've never met any of these people and we're telling the same story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So this particular book, the reason I love it is because it's about owning your voice, right? Which is, I think, one of those things that is very, it can almost feel like just out of reach. Like, I think we understand that it's important to own your voice, but we don't necessarily know how to do that. And even in your bio, how you talked about the fact that you can tend to make things that seem ambiguous very practical for people. And I mean, I totally agree. From reading your book, I think that you really broke down so many things for us. So, can you talk just a little bit about, just to get us started, about some of the small and big ways that you started owning your voice?
I think when I think of the book, the first thing that comes to mind is actually writing the book itself. Because when I had the proposal ideas, I was discouraged from writing Ready to Rise by prospective publishers, and their point was there are lots of great leadership books out there, and it's a crowded market. You don't want to do it. And I said, that's right, but all the people you've named are white men, and I said they're great white men. They write great things. It's just that our view, our experience, our learnings on leadership are as relevant. And why? And I said, are we saying that the only leadership we can learn from are white men? I didn't get a book deal from them. They passed.
Yes.
They passed in the book, but it was a real. I think for me, it's been this journey to reclaim what God has invested and to say that He has given us stories, He has given us experiences. And when I think of a voice, I think of not just the words that you're saying, but your identity and your gifts in action. That's what, in the Latin, the word vocation is from the similar root as voice, because they're intimately connected. So I think one of the little ways has been saying yes, saying yes and saying, these are the gifts I have. This is the story I tell. This is how you made me, God. I didn't. There's no. It's not. I'm not making it up. I didn't decide this. This is how you made me. And seeking to be faithful with that has been some of the initial ways. I didn't even realize in the beginning, Kendra, that I actually needed to agree with God first. I had to say yes. I had to. I spent a lot of time running away from my gifts because it get me into trouble, or running away from my voice. So one of the first things was I had to sit down and say, okay, what are the situations I find myself in, and what role do I take in those places? Am I often the one who's giving advice? Am I often the one who's fixing things, sorting people out, rather than getting frustrated with it? Is there a whisper from heaven there about what He's invested in me? And rather than it happen to me, will I be intentional? Will I be intentional with the gifts I've been given? Because the truth is, we don't live beyond what we believe about ourselves. So if we believe our voice should be small, we'll fill that small. We'll fill that small little glass. If we believe there's an ocean, then we'll learn how to swim. And I believe we need to learn how to swim.
Yes. We need to learn how to swim. And you do that one step at a time. And so like there's these little small things that you do. Was there some type of moment for you, like some defining moment? For me, one of the reasons why this particular book just really jumped out at me is because for me, I have been a Christian for over 20 years. I became a believer when I was 18 years old. And so a lot of my voice, I feel like I suppressed it for a really long time because, especially when you talk about justice, right? When you talk about justice in the church, because the constant messaging is we need to forgive, we need to we need unity, right? And so if you open your voice, if you use your voice to say anything other than I forgive you or we're all one, then the expectation is that, you know what, you're dividing the body of Christ, right? And so but last year, for me, I know for a lot of people, their trigger moment was George Floyd. But for me, it was actually Ahmaud Arbery, because I am a mother of teenagers as well. I have a son who is now 18. I have a 19-year-old daughter, and I have a 12-year-old son. And last year, when Ahmaud Arbery was killed, I remember crying, like grieving his death, like it was my son, because it could have been my son. One of the ways that we have bonded is through running. And he's done so many different races with me. And he was an athlete, he played basketball and all those things, right? And so when I heard people, instead of people out of this man's humanity saying, oh my gosh, how can we allow this to happen, for these men to track this young man down in the middle of the street and murder him? And, but the question was, well, what did he do? He must have done something. And I was not just hearing that from the world, I was hearing it in the church. And that really broke me. And I just felt like I felt a sense of responsibility, because I was like, you know what, I can't be silent about this anymore. I just think about that Martin Luther King quote about the we begin to die, I think, the moment we stay silent about things that matter, right? And so for me, that was a moment for me. And then all the series of other moments that happened where I was like, okay, I got to use what God has given me to do what I can do. So what did you have a moment like that where it was just like, I know that there were all these other moments, but maybe there's one that really just jumps out at you?
Oh, I think there was a personal moment that was, and then there were some public moments. I think the personal moment, there was a personal moment in my 20s when it was about a guy. It was always about a guy. And I think there was a relationship I hoped would work. And I made myself small. He wasn't abusive or anything like that.
That's good.
I made myself small to be acceptable to him. And I tried to I would find myself reshaping my ideas in his image, reshaping my gifts in his image, and not listening to the discomfort of who I was trying to force myself to become. And when when he didn't commit, I remember thinking, okay, I was 26, and I remember thinking, I loved this guy, but I couldn't be who I was with this guy. I couldn't be who I was made to be, and it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I tried, I tried at school to fit in. I tried at college I tried every time. And now I tried to fit in, and my heart was broken anyway. I thought, I'm not trying anymore. And so on a personal level, that was a moment where I thought, right, no more compromising, no more pretending, no more dumbing yourself down, no more pretending you don't know anything. In a personal level. And I think on a public level, I think it was as I began to start speaking at events and being the only woman in the room and the only Black woman in the room. And I was like, I'm tired. I literally just got irritated. I was just irritated. I'm like, what is this? What is this? Well, that. And people say, oh, I don't know where the women are. I don't know where the other Black women are. I'm like, actually, I could show you everybody. This is ridiculous. And I think there was this kind of, and I would talk to people and I'd recommend women's names and I'd recommend people and say, have you thought about this woman and this woman? And nothing was working. Nothing was changing. And I thought, oh, maybe it's because you don't want it to change. Maybe it's because you don't want it to change. And maybe, again, this is another version of me trying to tell someone to do something that maybe I'm supposed to do. And so I think so it wasn't a one moment, but it was this kind of repeated, like, here I am again, lonely. And I know I'm not the only woman leader there. And I got tired, honestly. Like when I was tired.
How do you feel that you got to where you are in your leadership journey, where you could see that you were the only person, right? Where you could see that you were the only woman of color. Like what were so you in the book you talk about a lot of different ways to develop yourself. Um, do you feel like those things that you specifically talk about in the book are the things that help you progress to the point where you were one of the only women leaders of color in the room, or just woman leader, whatever it is in the room? Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts about that, because I've always been curious, because you are in a position, for those of us on the outside looking in, you are in a position where we see you on different stages and we see you surrounded by certain people. And so the question does become, how did you get there?
Yeah. I'm very ambitious. But then most of us are, really, if we allow ourselves. I think there are a number of things. One, when I was about 18, 19, I did have one mentor who was a Black woman. And she had been that, Shonda Rhimes calls it the first only different, doesn't she, in the UK? And I was at this Bible college, and again, there were like 3 Black people there, maybe. Anyway, it was the 90s. Times were hard. And it was outside of London. It was 2 hours north of London. So I needed to know where to get my hair products, because
That's right. Of course.
And it was Jerry Curl days, or Leisure Curl, or Wave Nouveau. One of the 3. I was a late developer on the hair. And she had the same, and I'm like, okay, so we bonded over that. But there was this woman who was leading, and she was very comfortable in her own skin. Do you know what I mean? She was very comfortable in her own skin, and I think it was a visual affirmation that certain things were possible. And I remember, and Marion Wright Edelman says you can't be what you can't see. And I had one visual. Do you know what I mean? This woman who was out of the box, who was leading, and she was very herself. She was creative. She was a wonderful woman. I'm still in touch with her now. But I think some of it was, I think some of it were the teams I was part of. There were a couple of leaders who were like sponsors for me, who would open doors on my behalf, and I just had to make sure when I got through that door that I would take the door off the hinges, so that so that I wouldn't get again. And it's funny, because I was at a conference a while back, and someone said, how does a woman get opportunities? And they said, well, your gift will make room for you. And all the men in the room were like, yeah. And I said, can I just disagree? I said, I don't want to be rude. And this is a lovely conversation, but it's also not true, because we were always made in the image of God, and our gifts didn't always make room for us because sexism.
You better shut your mouth, Joe. Shut your mouth.
All those things that were in the way. We were always gifted. Throughout history, we've been gifted. But people enslaved and pillaged and did all these terrible things, they were all made in the image of God. Don't tell me that gifts make room, because the devil does other things, and human beings and their brokenness does other things. I think what I would say, that from these things from the book, having community has been huge for me. Key people has been huge for me. Dealing with my wounds has been huge for me. Saying yes when I wanted to say no has been huge for me. And resilience has been huge for me. Like, okay, if the door shuts, we'll find. And I'm an immigrant, and I'm grown from immigrants, and there was always the sense of you're always finding a way, because you're always having to make your way in a world which is not your home.
Yes, that's so good.
And I think I've learned, and honestly, Kendra, when I look back on the lessons of my life, a lot of it I learned when my aunts were doing my hair. Do you know what I mean? The conversations that they would have, giving each other advice, saying, you know what I mean, working out how to do this, working out where to get food, all of that sort of stuff. There are skills and talents and ways of being that we have not valued because they're not written in the books. But that's because the books aren't written by us.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage. I think that networking is key, but we are our own network as well. We can propel each other into opportunities, and I think that's something I've learned more probably in the last 10 years. That we can mentor and sponsor each other, and that we need to. That's been key. I've spent time working on my gifts. I would encourage us. That's helped me in terms of what does it look like to be good at what you do.
So good. I just want to share what you said. We can mentor and sponsor each other. When we started reading this book, one of the things that I felt like God put on my heart, and I told the women in the book club, is that He didn't want us to idolize you and the accomplishments that you have, because when you start to idolize people, then you somehow think that God can't use you just like He used them, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like you gave so much insight into your journey and the journey of the women, like the women that you gathered to gather some of this information for the book. And one of the things that I just heard you say was also embracing like our own story, who
Yeah.
we are and our background, the things that make us us, like the
Yeah.
fact that I'm a very Southern country,
Mhm.
even though I have lived in Arizona for
Mhm.
24 years, I still have my Southern twang.
Yeah.
Um, and all those imperfections or things that maybe we see as imperfections,
Mhm.
that those are a part of our story. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Assimilation isn't it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There were times when I was told or thought that assimilation was it, that
Hmm.
being more like that is, but that's,
Yes.
but you know, the authority, we've got to live, in consistency with our God-given identity, because that's where the authority flows. It's not
Yeah.
just who we are, it's whose we are. And He didn't make her. It's like David and Saul. David's about to
Hmm.
slay giants, and he says to Saul, I can't go in this. I can't go in this armor. We
Yes.
cannot go in someone else's armor with someone
Yes.
else's story and expect to get someone else's breakthrough. God has given you your armor for your story, for your breakthrough. But it
Hmm.
took a long time to own that. And so to learn how to speak in the way that I do, to, you know, where I grew up in London, it wasn't cool to be Nigerian at all.
Hmm.
In the 80s, it wasn't a thing
Yeah.
to be doing, or to be in. And it was, I'm 5'9", that was too tall. I'm dark,
Hmm.
that was too dark. Do you know what I mean? Everything was too much, too much. I
Yes.
had to learn to embrace it and say, Lord, bring the anointing.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? In terms of, this is how He made us. And so I would encourage us to say, dig into the story of God in your life. I mean,
Yes.
and the lessons you've learned from your mothers, from all of us, from our aunties, from our, I mean,
Hmm.
they gave us advice whether we were asking for it or not.
That's right.
Let's be clear, and it's still happening on WhatsApp.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
still happening. So, you know,
Hmm.
dig into the lessons you learned in the secret place, in the hard places, the things that you knew were right and the things that you knew were wrong. They are transfer. Your testimony are tools in somebody else's life, if you would choose to believe that they are as valid as the book.
Amen. Amen. You are kind of preaching to us right now. I love it.
I
I
think
love
we're
it. Love
strong
it.
in
Love
that.
it. We bringing the preach out of you. So, one of the things, oh man, I just feel like I have so many questions for you. One of the things that you talked about, the great woman theory, right? Which is kind of this, basically this idea of individualism, that we have to know it all, do it all, carry it all, be it all of those things. So why do you think that we continue to idolize that, and why, and how is it hurting us by doing that?
You know, over the years, I think I've realized that we all do it for different reasons. So,
Mhm.
when I think of some of my white friends, I think some of my white friends have felt they've got to do it to get ahead. I think when
Mhm.
I think of my black friends, I think it's because we do it not to get left behind. Because
Mhm.
all of us have been told.
Mhm.
And I mean, my Auntie Bassie sat me down when I was 7 years old. 7 years old. She said, "Joe, it's not going to be easy. You have two marks against you. You're black and you're a woman. That
Mhm.
means you can't do what your friends do. You will not get away with what we've all been schooled on how to act in front of the police. We've all been schooled on how to handle these teachers. We've all been schooled on it. Why? Because it was necessary. And that meant you had to be things. And so my aunt would say, you've got to be at least twice as good. At least. And so if you're going to be twice, the thing is, Auntie Bassie was talking about education, but
Yeah.
I'm a 7-year-old when I'm hearing this, and because there've been some kind of upheavals and uprisings not far from where we lived at that time. And when Auntie Bassie's talking to me, she's like, "Let's get you through school." And they weren't even being bitter. They were just like, "We have been in this country 20 years. We are nurses. We're trying to get our kids. We're taking care of people back home. We're trying to get our kids. We've got to keep moving forward." but you can build on it. It can build into you a level of perfectionism, a level of survival mode. You know, I mean, I don't know when we all last took days off. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yes.
And we may have taken our day off on one thing, but was our day off on one thing a day on for another? You know, we and it would be wonderful if we could all sit there and say, "Oh, don't worry, friends, there's no scarcity." But we know the data shows that Black women are the most educated in America, but we ain't getting the jobs.
Yes. Yeah.
We know that the reason why there's been a rise in Black women in entrepreneurship is because they are not getting to where they should be getting in the corporate world. And we know these things are real, that people look at our names, they look at our, you know, my married name is Saxton, my maiden name is Oyeneron, it's a Nigerian name. People look at the name, that's it. It's done.
Yes.
And so it's hard for us to try and do anything differently when we know we've grown. This has been in our mother's milk.
Yeah.
That we've and so I think we can do the great woman theory because we've got responsibilities. We're intergenerational. We're thinking how do we take care of family? How do we take care of kids? How do we take care of business? How do we do all this stuff? And it is very and at what point do we look and say it's gonna be fine when you turn on the TV and Ahmaud Arbery, you turn on the TV and Breonna Taylor, you turn on the TV and George Floyd, you turn on the TV and you see unequal pay day. It's understandable. It's and we have to be honest. We have to be honest that we live with created scarcity. Now our God is still the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Our God is still mighty, but we need to know what battles we're actually fighting, because otherwise we internalize them and think that it's because we're terrible people.
Yes.
And actually, and it's why we need sisterhood. It's why we need environments like this. It's why we need we become each other's brain trust and mentors and sponsorship. Why? Because we understand the unique challenges that we face. And we work out how to navigate and knock doors down.
Yes. You know, when you talked about scarcity in the book, I was like, wow. I've never heard it described that way, but it definitely resonated very deeply. This idea that there's only room for one. And then we have to decide how we're going to be generous because we're aware of it. We know that feeling is there, but then there's a generosity that's needed. And that actually makes me think in terms of you talking about the sponsors, right? So I know that the idea of mentors and sponsors is something that I hear talked about quite a bit in a corporate environment.
Yeah.
So it was nice to hear you actually explain what that was in the book. And then also talk about how we start to go about that process of getting sponsors. And I just want to read this real quick. Carla Harris, she basically says, a sponsor is the critical relationship in your career. A mentor, frankly, is nice to have, but you can survive a long time without a mentor, but you are not going to succeed in any organization without a sponsor. So why is a sponsor so valuable to leaders? And then how do we go about taking the initiative to find one?
I mean, it's crucial because a sponsor uses their credibility and uses their capital to put your name at the table.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so people, that's, you know, kids get internships because somebody's playing golf, two friends are playing golf, and someone says, could you give my son needs an internship, can they do anything? They're like, yeah, of course they can. That's the sponsorship thing that's happening there. Someone is saying, I'm using our relationship, I'm using the relationship we have, and the fact that you've known me from time, you trust me, and I've got credibility to recommend someone forward. And it happens all the time. It's a normal part of working life, in corporate spaces, in creative spaces, wherever. So it is. I mean, I don't know that we have one every day, but I do think in particular junctures of our life, it's huge that we have this, and huge that we find them. And like I would say in this, sometimes our friends who have a lot of power may be them, to be honest. I think it's something for us to think through. How do we help someone else get to the next level? I do. I mean, there are moments where I'm like the prayer and the fasting. I'm like, God, be a sponsor. Jesus, be a sponsor. Because there are moments.
Yeah.
There are moments. And it's like, who's that person who's going to carry my name forward into these places? And it may be asking in our places of work to say, you know, I'm really committed to moving forward in my career and being all that I can be for the company. What are the avenues and where are the sponsorship opportunities? Who would you recommend? Sometimes I ask people who they recommend for the trajectory you want to go on, and it's actually not a selfish thing, because you get sponsored and you write, everybody wins. Whoever you're working for wins. Whoever sponsors. And let's be clear, right now everybody's trying to remember that in our corporate spaces, people are writing big things about how much they hate racism and how heartbreaking, devastating, offended they are by all the injustice in the world. This is where they can put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah.
Or their activity where their mouth is.
That's right.
Anybody can tweet. Anybody can tweet. Anybody can come up with a nice strategic plan on a PowerPoint. But somebody has to. Do you know what I mean? So I would say it's worth us asking these questions in our HR spaces or with our bosses in this era. I'm not saying everybody says yes, but it helps us know whether there's longevity in the spaces we're in as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an important one, because I was just saw Sheila's comments. I was saying the other day that the hard thing is if we don't do this, the scarcity is like, we want to get a place at leadership, like musical chairs. It's like musical chairs. The music plays, there are different dances, and they keep on pulling chairs away because there's room for one. There's room for one Black woman. There's room for one Black woman, one Latina woman. Do you know what I mean? And the problem is there aren't enough chairs.
Yes.
The problem is not that you want to be at the table. The problem is that the game, and you know what, with musical chairs, then they switch in different directions. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and then before you know it, you are racing and overdoing it and working extra hard. And it's not whether you're fast enough. The problem again is the chairs and the lack of the chairs. Because even when you get the chairs, it doesn't mean you're welcome.
Yes. Even when you get the chairs, does not mean you're welcome. That's, diversity versus inclusion, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, how many times have we been, you know what I mean? Someone wanted a little seasoning on an event or a little seasoning in an environment to make them feel like they're doing well, or because they are still naive and haven't worked out the difference between diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
But in that said, if that's our reality, then we have, let me pull back a second. I'm struck by it'll feel left field, but it'll come into land. I'm struck by Jesus talking about to his disciples to look for the person of peace.
Yeah.
He sends them, he goes, you're going out as lamb amongst wolves, which isn't encouraging.
Not at all.
I'm about to die and be ripped limb from limb. And he said, look for the person of peace. They're open to you. This is in Luke 9:10. They welcome you and they serve you. And I want to encourage us, who are and other translations say the worthy person or the man of peace or the worthy man. Who are the people who are open to you as you? Who are the people who welcome you as you? Who are the people who in some ways invite you to other projects or new opportunities? That person.
Yes.
Look for them.
Yes. Look for that person.
Look for them, because they're not performative in the same way. They may not have it all down. They may not get it all. But it's important. And I think I would encourage us to consider what our networks are. How robust are our networks right now? We won't find sponsors and mentors if we're not networking.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, I like hearing you explain that, because we can't sit back and say, oh, well, there's not enough chairs at the table, so then I can just be okay with the fact that there's not enough chairs, right? So what you're saying to us is there's still parts that we can play in being proactive and taking some form of initiative ourselves. Do you think that sometimes you just have to create your own table in the process? Yeah.
I do, because I think the reason why I say we have to look at the chair thing is because you have to know whether you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
Because how many of the women on here have more degrees than the thermometer, have all the experience, and still aren't. We just need to know, am I going anywhere with this? No? Okay, then I'm out. thank you for your service. I'm out. And I do believe we have to build our own tables. And I do believe, particularly as women of color, as Black women, Indigenous women, and women of color have to build their own tables. Because then we get to, because the thing is, the tables, it's not just who's at the table, it's who owns it that makes a difference.
Yes.
If you own your table in some way, that will determine, you set the culture, you set the language, you define who's worthy, you define who's able. And so, Kendra, this is one of your tables in this space. You know what I mean? In this space, women don't have to, no one has to edit themselves to be here. No one has to deny who they are to be here. No one has to shrink their dreams to be here. Why? Because you have got this broad, wide, long table, and we need somewhere where we can breathe and not just survive, but actually flourish in our giftings and our abilities, and build tables, build the kinds of spaces, environments where we can grow as leaders, where we can spur one another's leaders, where we can hold each other accountable, where we can recommend each other. Basically, we need our Sunday nights with our aunties to braiding the next generation. That's what we do again.
Yeah. You sharing and talking about that right now is just so incredibly powerful. I wish you could see Shannon shaking her head as she like lifted up her hands, like just man, I truly feel that I have spent a lot of energy begging to be at tables. Yeah. And that's why reading this book is really challenging and impactful, and just a great reminder of that I'm going in the right direction, that we're moving towards what God is calling us to do. I could ask you like 20 more questions, but I want to give the women that are in the audience an opportunity to ask you their questions. So I'm gonna bring up Melissa first because she has some really great questions. Hey, Melissa. We can't hear you right now.
All right, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Hello. Oh my gosh, I'm just so tickled right now. This is my second time reading this book, and so I'm like, okay, God, you brought this to me twice because I didn't get it right the first time.
Oh my God,
I'm getting it right the second time. But as we're talking about mentors and sponsors, thinking about how can we build that community where women are willing to do that. And, like our women's ministry group or, women's Bible study, how can we build that concept of mentorship and sponsorship in a multi-generational setting? I'm in a place where we have a lot of older saints, and the younger saints don't always connect and come together to do that in a very, a healthy and effective way. Yeah. So.
I think it can be hard because if only we were starting with a blank slate. Each generation has had their experiences, and so it's like, well, I'm looking, but I'm not sure that space is one for me. I would encourage us to think through what are the things that people have had shared experience of. Like, where is there a place for Q&A? Where is there a place for storytelling? I was listening to a podcast today, and they were talking about Triple H asking about a hero, a hardship, and a habit. You know what I mean? That kind of thing of like the things from someone's stories that because otherwise we are reading each other and misunderstanding each other because we've not heard each other's stories, and we're assuming that person has nothing to give us because we've not heard their story. So I think sometimes we have to craft an experience that helps people and that points to what you want to do, because otherwise we say like it's going to be like this, it's going to be like this, and it isn't. So, but if in some of your regular things you can have a moment which illustrates it, then it's like, this is what I mean.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and so almost it's like a fishbowl almost, that people get to see it and encounter it and then feel the benefits of it before the buy-in.
Gotcha. Cool. And then I have one other question. You talked a little bit about using our voice. What mindset do we need to equip ourselves with as we're going into a place where we know our voice is needed, but it isn't necessarily received. Especially women in the church, in some situations where you have the answer and you can do this, but how can we go in equipped? What kind of mindset?
No, I think there's a theological mindset that I would go in first, in the sense of many of when we look at our heroes of faith, men and women, they are speaking because the fire's in their bones, not because it's necessarily going to be received. They're speaking because it's the right thing to do. And so that gives us a measure of our expectations. I'm not saying that everybody's going to throw stones at you, but I think that's one piece. I think I would encourage you to think of what's the vehicle God wants you to use. Is it a written thing? Is it a conversation? If there's things to confront, what are the questions? I often confront with questions because then you're inviting conversation. And particularly if it's going to be challenging, I don't want to dumb down what I'm saying. In fact, I want it to be more pointed, but I want it to not end the conversation. I want it to open one. So I invite something with a question. And I think I would encourage us in terms of the mindset to say, what does it mean to be faithful? What does it mean to be faithful to the gift, the moment, and to that context? Because your voice makes a positive contribution. Your voice isn't just about slapping somebody, it's about empowering for human flourishing. So this is part of your contribution.
Oh, that's good.
And I think that's an important thing. And because it's part of a contribution, it's worth investing in, nurturing, cultivating, that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. What does it mean to be faithful? Because we are stewards, right? We're stewards of this gift that God has given us. So how do we be more faithful with that? And to me, like, asking that question will help you answer a lot of other questions, because like you said, when I stand at the end of my life, I want to be able to say to God, I used everything you gave me. And we're not going to be able to say, well, God, they stopped me from using what you gave me. He's not gonna hear that, right?
That's good.
So that's just a really powerful question. What does it mean to be faithful? All right. So thank you, Melissa. All right. Erica is next. My bestie from the Westie.
Hello. Oh my goodness. This is so rich. I just have to say, this is incredibly rich. I already have 2 pages of notes right here. My question is about intimidation. Have you ever felt intimidated by what you knew God had before you? And how do you overcome that, or how have you overcome that? Because I hear and see your confidence and how you pour into others, and it takes something real deep on the inside of you to have that available.
Yeah, I do. I understand what you mean. I do wrestle with it. And for me, it comes at certain times. And so I would say, like, if I'm starting something new, there are particular battles there are particular battles I go through again and again. There is who do you think you are? Nobody's got time for this. What do you think you're doing? And I'm used to those battles coming now. I'm used to them. So but there are still other moments where I think, particularly over this last year with the pandemic, it really knocked confidence, because it knocked my life. It knocked all the things that I was down to do got that just rocked it all. So there are a couple of things that I do. One of the tricks I'm doing with my mind at the moment, I mean, even this week, was I get up and say, right, today I'm going to pretend I am afraid of anything. And today I'm going to act like I feel courageous. Because courage is an action, it's not a feeling anyway.
That's right.
In reality. So because I was wrestling with anxiety and just and for me, sometimes when I overthink, it makes me creative. Sometimes when I overthink, I get immobilized. So I need to do something that interrupts the overthinking. And it needs to be an external thing. And so the external thing is, I'm going to act like I'm not afraid today. And by the end of the day, I may have run out of courage, but I'll have done some things by then. Another thing is that I do is I have, like, maybe there's one other person who you connect with regularly. about something, and either we work together or we need we process those ideas together. So we almost, sometimes we would hold one another accountable about kind of the not so great things in your life, but we don't always hold one another accountable about the great things, about the gifting, and like what are you doing with your gift today? What are you doing? How are you investing it this week? And you're going to talk again on Tuesday, so let's hope you've got an idea. You guys say the same thing. So those are two things, and then there's on a practical level, I do, and again, this was really helpful for me in the pandemic as well, was Matthew 14 and Jesus walking on the water for the disciples, and the disciples are knocked back and forth by the storm. And Peter has this thing, if this is you, tell me to come. And Jesus says, come, and he gets out the boat, and you realize nothing in this, it's still a storm, but he walks on the word that Jesus gave him. That's the thing. He steps out of the safe and the familiar in response. So what is the word God's given you? What is the word he's given you for this year, for your circumstances, for this moment, about the situation, about your leadership? And what does walking, because again, both those things are movement. So often in the Bible, we talk about waiting on God, and I'm just going to wait on God. But the word for waiting in the Bible is a proactive word. It actually is like a waiter coming and saying, what about this? What about this? So I would say, what's the word that you've got to walk on as well? And hopefully those are the three things that have helped me the most, particularly in this past year.
That's so good. Well, I don't necessarily have another question, but I will tell you that my word for 2021 is rise. And so when Kendra had this book, when she had this book club, I was like, yes, this is it. This is it. So thank you. Thank you so much. This is just an honor, honestly.
Thank you so much.
It really is. It really is an honor. So thank you, Erica. Okay, I'm going to get one more question for you, Jo. And it's going to be from Shannon.
Yay.
Shannon, you're muted.
Oopsie. I think we've all done that about 25 times, right? Hey, you're muted. Hey, you're muted. Like I need that on a t-shirt. Okay. So my question is, as leaders, we're pouring out, we're doing so much, especially during the pandemic. It was just so much. So can you share some suggestions around self-care, particularly as women of color? Because we were already carrying a lot before we got started.
Yes. Yes, I will say a couple of things. I have found, I would say one, this is there's a quote from a book, isn't it, about, it was from the Bourne books, about rest as a weapon. I think we have to see rest as not a treat or a luxury. We have to see it not as something you've earned, but something that your body requires, a part of your design specifications. The way God has designed you to flourish includes rest, and the kind of rest that is not just a collapsing into a spacing out, but something which is renewing. So I want to ask, if we're not having a day off, can we have a half day? If we can't have a half day, can we have a morning? Do we need to make arrangements with someone so that they can have certain parts of our life down so that we can attend to things? Now, this has obviously been made so much harder with the pandemic. We've not been able to do things with people in a particular way, but what can we have to get creative, because this is worth fighting for, because your creativity, your innovation, your resilience in this era will be founded by you actually having some mental space. I would say, even if it's, like I've spent a lot of time like stepping outside for a moment just to take some deep breaths. That has been and to break up the day, but also to breathe. And I was reading just over the weekend that your stress cycle benefits from when you breathe in, but you breathe out for longer. So you breathe in for 3, you breathe out for 7. Apparently there's something about that process which is good for us mentally. So I'm like, game on, I'm in. I want to encourage you to, what do you do that you enjoy? What do you do that you enjoy? Because we need to recapture something of our enjoyment. There was a taste and see. So I have been pulling out my 90s R&B, because I do believe that Sisters with Voices and On Vogue can help us in this time. And I remembered I put it on really loud and I just danced, and I thought my kids will just have to see this part of my life. I don't even know why it was so nice for me, and it was so healing and so restorative. but it just helped me breathe. We haven't had much fun. There's been a lot to lament. There's been a lot to mourn over. There's been a lot to get angry about, righteously so. But if we are going to go to war, we have to restore our souls. We have to. For the life we're fighting for the justice we want to see, for us to be able to labor in things, we've got to build ourselves up. So I want to encourage you to eat some food that you love, listen to music that you love, talk to people that you love and enjoy. You know, maybe that person who drains us, we can give a wider orbit. You know, maybe we talk to them once a week, maybe every 2 weeks is going to be the blessing, you know, for you. And weep when you need to. Allow yourself the ministry of tears. You know? If you're taking care of other people, not everything has to be perfect. You know, my house is a disgraceful mess. I'm looking at it, and this is the one corner. And even this, I had to throw some things. I have pens at my feet. I don't even know. I don't know, and I just don't know. But I've had to break up with perfectionism. I had to break up with perfectionism.
Yes.
And give my soul air. I cannot emphasize this enough. We have been the workhorses, the mules, and the wet nurses for everything else and everyone else. Done. This is not your fearfully and wonderfully made self. Your fearfully and wonderfully made self doesn't just deserve rest. You were created with rest in mind.
Amen. That's so good.
Thank
it's
you.
so free. It's so freeing too when you break up with perfectionism.
Yeah, we might have to do it every day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah. It's like I just think about how many books haven't been written, songs haven't been sung, podcasts haven't been started.
I think she pointed at you. Shannon.
The book that hasn't been written, that will be shit. I'm sorry, Shannon. I didn't mean to put you on blast.
Yes, you did, but it's good. It's good. Isn't that what community does? Can he put you on blast in a good way?
It's true, and I think it is important because how many of our dreams are not happening because of interrupted time?
Yeah.
Interrupted time, and too many times.
Now y'all gonna make me cry on camera. Okay, I see how y'all are.
We have been, and it felt valid because we were taking care of everybody else, and we were taking care of other people's dreams, and we were nurturing other people's ideas, and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, you need some uninterrupted time, and it is not selfish, sisters. It is not selfish. It is not vain or anything for you to say, what it looks like for me to be faithful is to have a good night's sleep and get up and do something that brings me life so that I can write that book, so that I can go the next step on that podcast, the next step on that business. I wonder where we would be if we treated ourselves the way we are so good for everybody else. You know?
Well, thank you for the prophetic word. Amen. I feel like I've been cleansed. You can tell me where to send my offering. You know, all the things.
The impartation has happened. So I'm gonna stay on, Shannon. I'm gonna actually bring everybody that's in the book club, the people that are in the studio. We have a couple of people that aren't in the studio, bringing them on. LaVista is commenting from Facebook. She is her specialty is self-care. Like that's like, so you are all like in her Kool-Aid, like just hyping her up, Jo and everything else. So she's hype. And then also Patrice is also in the book club. She's been on Facebook. Amen. And so you have an amen corner over on Facebook. You know, we really wanted to thank you. You know, it's not often that you get an opportunity to thank the author of the book that you read and let them know how much their words have meant. And I know that writing a book is a labor of love. I have written a couple of them myself, and it is a labor of love. And so we just really wanted to be able to tell you thank you for using your voice to help us activate our voices. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's so great of you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes. So we want to, I'm going to take everybody off the screen right now, except you, Jo. And I want you to tell people how would they, like if they wanted to take a next step. So they heard you today and they really know that they need help. So, sometimes that mentorship, right? The mentorship, the coaching is the thing that can push us over the finish line. So I know that you have a leadership initiative that I wanted you to be able to share with everyone.
Yeah, I have a digital coaching platform that has women has women leaders from all around the world, which is wonderful. Some in business, an unexpected number of accountants, speakers, ministry leaders, corporate leaders, and we gather. We have other leaders come and speak into what we're doing, and we just developed these circles as well. There are women from Australia, Japan, India, the States, England, Canada, but all in common is they are unapologetically leaders, or they're learning to grow their voices in their leadership. You are more than welcome to come and join us there, and be surrounded, put yourself in spaces that which can help you thrive. Yeah, Sheila can tell you all about it, and it's just a great environment. I have a newsletter which is free. You can just go up on my website, and that lets you know of events that I'm doing. I've got an event now. I haven't told anybody this, so this is a quiet one, although I know this is streamed. I do leadership intensives, and I'll be doing one near the end of the year. That'll be maybe 50 leaders or so in November in Minneapolis. So yeah, I said at the beginning, access and opportunity has always been the thing that gets me. So, I know that in different seasons of life, we have different opportunities, economically, all that kind of stuff. So there's a podcast, Lead Stories. There's a newsletter. There's a coaching platform. Just depending on whatever access you need right now, there is something there for you. And I welcome you and want to invite you to bring your full self to it, and let's see what God will do.
Amen. Thank you so much, Jo. So josaxton.com is where you can find all the different opportunities in order for you to be able to have take a next step with Jo. Read her book. I think this book, Ready to Rise, is a great first step, a great start, especially if you are newer to finding your voice and you really need courage to do that. I think that this book will be very valuable and empowering for you. And then all the other resources, like you said, I've listened to your podcast and different things like that. So I really have enjoyed this opportunity today to really get to hear from you, like not just your words on a page, but your passion. And thank you for doing what you're doing. I know that it is not always easy, but I want you to know that we need your voice. And thank you so much for all that you have already done to pave the way for other women that are coming right behind you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, all right. So Jo, I'm going to go ahead and let you go because you have given us the time that you said that you would, and we're extremely appreciative for that. So thanks, Jo.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, y'all. All right, y'all. So before you head out, thank you all so much for, being so engaging on social media, the women in the book club. Thank you all so much for being here and engaging with the comments and everything. You guys have just really brightened my day today. And before you go, I know that people are going to either listen to this on the podcast or you're going to watch the video later on. And I just want to let you know about a couple of things that I actually have coming up. So one of the things is I want to encourage you, if you have not joined the book club already, I would encourage you to do that. strongher.me/book club. You can find out the details. If you go there right now, you're just going to see the book that we just finished, which is Ready to Rise by Jo. But and you could still go ahead and sign up and register. But our next book selection that we're going to be reading for the month of May, because we only meet on the odd months, is we're going to be reading Drop the Ball by Tiffany DeFoo. And so I will show you a picture of that in just a second. So Drop the Ball by Tiffany DeFoo is our next book. I tell people all the time that I feel like this particular book should be in the marriage and family section of the bookstore, not the business section, because it really is about how you start to let go of the control that you have in trying to do it all and be all in that great woman theory that we talked about. And so I want to encourage you to join us for that next book selection. But like I said, if you go right now over to strongher.me/book me/book club. You can go ahead and sign up, even though you will see the information from our previous book on there. And then the last thing that I wanted to share with you is that on April the 10th, I have the privilege to be able to speak at an event, the Purposely Designed Women's Conference. And I'm going to share with you a graphic for that. Let's see. Y'all give me 1 second. This is why I need an extra person helping me do this stuff. Talk amongst yourselves, people. Talk amongst yourselves. So I'm going to share my screen with y'all. Okay. Here we go. All right. So the Purposely Designed Virtual Conference is on April the 10th. And the thing that I'm actually going to be talking about at this conference is how to reclaim your voice after a devastating, defining moment. And so for those of you who have, you've watched today, maybe you've even read the book, and you are still having to try to get past the hurdle, the fear that maybe you possibly feel about stepping into what God is calling you to because of maybe a defining moment that really crippled you in terms of your confidence. I'm going to be delivering a workshop at that event. I have my friend Aisha Cogborn, who is going to be talking about finding your purpose through entrepreneurship. Pastor Janet Wind is going to be talking about dreaming again. A lot of us, as we get older, we kind of give up on the dreams and the passion that God has placed on the inside of us. And so she wants to help stir that up in you again. And then Sheila Arrington, who is actually the host of that conference, is going to be talking about the different seasons of purpose. And she is phenomenal. She's one of those mentor women that we talked about previously, who is really, I just feel like God has placed her in my life for this season where I don't necessarily have a ton of women who are older than me who've raised their children that I necessarily look to for that leadership. And so Sheila has been such a blessing to me, and she's hosting this event. And you can find out more about her event if you go to SheilaArringtonMinistries.com/events. Okay. So SheilaArringtonMinistries.com/events. All right, y'all. So thank you all so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. We have, share this video with someone that you feel like needs that encouragement, someone who needs to know that they have a voice and that they should be using it, that they need to let go of whatever it is that's holding them back from really fulfilling the purpose and the plan that God has for their life. All right, y'all. Until next time, remember to work your plan and watch God work. Bye, y'all.